reasonably implementing its wildfire protection plan and has taken the actions that are described in the plan. The documentation must describe and verify the development and adoption of plan components and identify and address actions that have not yet been implemented. It must also address any outstanding deficiencies reported during the PUC's most recent audit and safety inspection of the utilities infrastructure. House Bill 3984 empowers the PUC to adopt requirements to verify that investor-owned utilities are applying risk-based wildfire mitigation standards and procedures to protect the public safety, reduce risk to utility customers, and promote electric system resilience to wildfire damage. The PUC can require applicants to provide reviews, assessments, or evaluations conducted by third parties that demonstrate efforts regarding risk reduction and development of a resilient electric system. The bill also directs the PUC to adopt rules that include, first, reporting and auditing requirements for determining an applicant's implementation of its wildfire protection plan, and second, the timing, procedures, reporting requirements, and standards for the review of an application for a wildfire safety certification. The amendment in the bill is clear that the issuance of a wildfire safety certification does not establish immunity against claims for damages resulting from a wildfire. Denial of an application for a wildfire safety certification does not establish liability for claims for damages resulting from a fire. Institution of the wildfire safety certification process will protect ratepayers and communities and set clear expectations for utilities operating in these fire-prone days. This is a critical step to improve wildfire protection planning. The third component in House Bill 3984 is direction to the PUC to contract with a third-party consultant for a study of catastrophic risk and recovery. The study must develop a range of scenarios, examining the risks and the impacts of electricity service disruption to communities located in areas with high risk of wildfires. It will look at the liability risks from wildfires for an electric company and the effects of those risks on the company's ability to access capital or insurance. It will look at the pace of wildfire recovery funding, often way too long in coming. And it will look at the need for fair and expedient economic compensation for damages. The consultant's work will be paid for via an assessment on the electric companies that cannot be recovered from ratepayers. The bill directs the PUC to report interim findings to the legislature during the 2026 session. It is my fervent hope that those findings will help us understand the next steps we need to take to minimize the risk of fire, to protect ratepayers, to keep our utilities solvent and operating at high efficiency, and to ensure that when the worst happens, we have a plan in place to expedite recovery. And with that, I will pass it over to Representative Krupp.
Excuse me, Representative Krupp.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of House Bill 3984. I'm going to talk briefly about sections 1 through 4. Members, there's been different types of legislation throughout this country or at this state and federally to help wildfire victims when it comes to potentially tax consequences when they are compensated for their loss as a result of wildfire. In the state, we passed a tax provision to not tax them for compensation for those losses, and we did not put a sunset on that. The federal government passed the Federal Disaster Tax Relief Act, and that is similar to the legislation that we passed, that wildfire survivors would not be taxed when they receive compensation for their loss or damages for their loss as a result of wildfire. That measure applies to compensation received by wildfire victims between December 31st and 2019 and January 1st, 2026. Of 2025 members. What we have done with this is say, if you are a survivor of wildfire and because of the length of your litigation, you do not receive compensation for your loss until the time period for that federal tax benefit has expired, the at-fault party for your loss will be responsible for that tax that you're going to have to pay. So if the litigation goes on beyond the time period for the federal tax relief, and they are compensated for fires that happen within that time period, they can go back to the at-fault party, in what we're seeing here in Oregon, Pacific Corps, and have Pacific Corps compensate you for the amount of taxes that you owe now that you would not have owed at the time the Federal Disaster Tax Relief Act was in place. Members, I think this bill has many positive things. How can we be forward-looking to prevent future wildfires? How can we be directive to our utilities to make sure they are taking all the steps necessary to prevent future catastrophic wildfires? What additional legislation and help can we be in this space? And that's covered in the study. And also, how can we make sure that the survivors, as they're going through difficult litigation, can receive the full benefits of federal tax legislation? I urge your support of this measure.
Is there further discussion? Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
I oppose House Bill 3984. This bill waters down a comprehensive bill, Senate Bill 926, that was passed out of the House Judiciary with a 7-0 vote in May 22nd. And this occurred after extensive hearings, deliberations, and discussions. In May, the House Judiciary Committee heard remarkable testimony on Senate Bill 926. That testimony from seniors, small business owners, and proud rural Oregons was dramatic, heartbreaking, and compelling. We must protect the victims. This is a tough vote for me, as House Bill 3984 does include one important provision. It modifies tax provision to ensure that victims will be protected on any tax assessment from any settlement or judgment, as already been discussed. House Bill 3984 is a last-minute substitute bill that contains none of the ratepayer protections in Senate Bill 926 and adopts just one of the multiple protections for fire victims. This current bill removes the following 5 key provisions that are contained in Senate Bill 926. First, a prohibition on cost shifts to ratepayers for money judgment owed to victims. Second, a prohibition on payments of dividends or profits before payments on judgments owed to the wildfire victims. Third, the creation of a tool for the PUC to balance availability and ability to provide electricity with the obligations to also pay the wildfire victims. Fourth, the adoption of a provision giving courts the ability to order liable parties to file a security or a bond to help ensure wildfire victims get paid. Fifth, the creation of prejudgment interest tool to protect wildfire victims from prolonged litigations and delaying tactics. All these things which have been removed from Senate Bill 926 hurt wildfire victims, and these victims know it. Every single piece of testimony on House Bill 3984 from victims opposed this bill. When the amended version of Senate Bill 926 passed out of the judiciary, it added 2 things also present in 3984. The first is a wildfire safety certificate, and the second is a study which has been discussed. I voted against both these amendments in judiciary. However, I voted for the bill as it came out amended in judiciary. I voted for this bill, 926, due to the abundance of protections for victims and consumers in the bill. Like the amended version of Senate Bill 926, House Bill 84 also contains a wildfire safety certificate, but it also strips out more of the good provisions of 926. Additionally, while this bill states that the wildfire safety certificate, quote, does not establish immunity against claims for damages resulting from a wildfire, end of quote, it is unclear then what it does. It is even less clear how a jury would interpret the wildfire safety certificate, and it is highly possible that it would help utilities muddy the waters enough that juries don't provide victims with the compensation that they deserve, thus reducing or eliminating the amounts of judgments. We should not vote for a bill that strips protections for wildlife victims and does nothing to protect ratepayers. Instead, we should be voting on Senate Bill 926 with the tax provisions that is contained in the current bill. Please vote no on this bill.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Sosa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, for those who didn't, to the bill.
Bill.
For those who didn't actually watch the hearing in House Judiciary, it was some of the most moving testimony that you will ever hear in this building about what has happened to these wildfire victims, how their homes were taken away, their communities were destroyed, their lives were upended. As my colleague from South Salem said, there was another bill that had a lot more protections for them. That is not the bill that is before us. We could have done more for them. We should have done more for them. We're choosing not to. I am disappointed in that decision. I am frustrated by that decision, and I urge a no vote.
Thank you, Representative. Is there further discussion? Colleagues, my wife Susan and I reside within the 2020 Echo Mountain Complex fire zone. Much of our community is still struggling to recover. The complex fire covers a large class, and sadly, the families affected by the 2020 fires constitute a much larger class. But out of an abundance of transparency, I will declare a potential conflict of interest. Again, is there further discussion? Seeing none, Representative Marsh, do you wish to close?
Briefly, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Colleagues, the wildfires that destroyed so much of my district in 2020 have really defined my legislative work since then. Immediately after the fires was the need to find food and shelter for probably 6,000 people who had been displaced. FEMA came in and we had to manage FEMA, because it turns out FEMA doesn't solve all the problems. They create problems of their own. We had to figure out how to clean up masses of debris, mountain of debris. Then we had to begin the process of recovery. And there were so many associated issues around that. We had to look at expedited permitting. We've looked at insurance reform. We looked at property tax relief for people whose homes and lives were destroyed. Honestly, it was an endless list. And then we had to look at housing, and we had to try to figure out how to get housing on the ground more quickly, which has really fueled my interest and work in looking at issues across the state and trying to be more innovative in how we approach housing. And with all that work mostly behind us, although not entirely, because many of our communities are still struggling, we have to figure out how to move forward. House Bill 3940 speaks to multiple aspects of this wildfire story. It acknowledges the struggle of wildfire survivors still looking for recovery and compensation. It sets a course for us to hold our utilities to the highest level of performance possible to prevent catastrophe. And it acknowledges that there is so much more that we need to do to reduce risk, and especially in regard to the utilities that operate with infrastructure that is, by its very nature, inherently high risk. Wildfire irrevocably changes lives, and recovery, we know from personal experience, takes years if it even happens. House Bill 3984 sets a course for the next steps that we need to keep communities as safe as possible in the face of unremitting risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. After this vote, I have plans to request a recess motion for lunch. However, I've also been requested that before we take the vote, that we stand at ease. The House will come to order. And having heard the close, those with the opinion this bill should pass will vote aye. Those opposed, no. The clerk will open the voting system. Representative Boyce, your vote? Representative Breeze Iverson votes no. Representative Choatson votes yes. Representative Deal votes yes. Representative Elmer votes no. Representative Lewis votes yes. Representative Javity votes yes. Representative Owens votes yes. Representative Osborne votes yes. Representative Bobby Levy votes no. Representative Greg Smith votes yes. Representative Scharf votes no. Representative Ruiz votes yes. Representative Nelson votes no. Representative Krupp votes yes. Representative Helfrich votes no. Representative Graber votes no. Representative Evans votes yes. Gombrich votes yes. House Bill, I'm sorry, Representative Dobson is a yes. Were there any other adjustments? House Bill 3984, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Colleagues, before I entertain a recess motion, are there any announcements? I understand that the Ways and Means Committee will meet at 1:30. And Representative Smith, may I have a recess motion, please, for 2:15 today?
Yes, sir. Mr. Speaker, I move the House stand in recess until 2:15 later this afternoon.
Representative Smith moves the House stand in recess until 2 p.m. today, June 27th, 2025, and without objection, the House... Oh, I'm sorry, correct. It was 2:15. 2:15 today. Without objection, the House is in recess.